The storm didn't arrive like weather. It arrived like a decision. One moment Everest was its usual brutal self, thin air, frozen rock, the grind of each step. Then the sky sealed shut, and the wind began to scream through the ridges as if the mountain had found a voice. Our head guide, Tenzin Dorje, had led teams for 20 years. Calm eyes, measured words. The kind of man who could read clouds the way a surgeon reads a heartbeat. When the first whiteout hit, he raised a gloved hand and signaled us to anchor. "No hero moves in this," he said. "We wait." We waited. Snow hammered our goggles. Rope vibrated like a live wire. The world shrank to the sound of our own breathing, ragged, metallic, too loud in the mask. Then Tenzin clipped off the fixed line. At first I thought he was checking an anchor. But he turned into the white, one steady stride, then another, and the storm swallowed him so completely it felt impossible he had ever existed at all. I counted. Not because I'm obsessive, but because time behaves differently above 26,000 feet. 12 minutes can be the difference between a safe return and a frozen silhouette that nobody retrieves. I counted anyway. Loud into my radio, as if numbers could build a bridge through the blizzard. At minute 9, my teammate whispered, "He's not coming back." At minute 12, a shape appeared. Tenzin stepped out of the whiteout and walked straight toward us. His movements were controlled, too controlled. His eyes found mine through the ice on his goggles, and something in my stomach dropped, like an elevator cable snapping, because the man who returned was wearing the same jacket, the same harness, the same face. But he didn't move like Tenzin Dorje anymore. The story you just heard is a fictional narrative created for entertainment. If you've ever watched footage of Everest and felt that pull, the mix of wonder and dread, you already understand why people keep going back. The mountain is stunning, yes, but it's also merciless. It doesn't care how prepared you are, how experienced your team is, or how strong your will might be. Up there, the smallest mistake becomes a verdict. In today's story, you're going to follow an expedition trapped in a sudden, violent storm near the upper camps, where the wind can tear fabric like paper, and the air is so thin that your mind starts playing tricks just to survive. You'll meet a guide with decades of experience, a team that trusts him with their lives, and a moment that breaks every rule of common sense. The guide disappears into a whiteout and returns 12 minutes later acting like a stranger wearing someone else's skin. And here's what makes it worse. This isn't a tale about monsters jumping from the fog. It's about the kind of fear that grows quietly, when the person you depend on starts making decisions that don't match the man you followed for weeks. When the mountain changes the temperature, the visibility, and something in the human spirit. Before we step into that storm together, do one quick thing for me. Subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy intense survival stories and expedition mysteries, hit the like button so this story reaches more people who love exploration narratives, and leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. I read the comments, and it's always incredible to see this community spread across so many countries. Now, tighten your oxygen mask. Check your carabiner. Feel the rope pull against your harness, because the wind is rising again. And Tenzin Dorje is about to speak. The story you just heard is a fictional narrative created for entertainment. The storm had a way of erasing the past. 1 minute there were footprints, a thin trail of compressed snow and grit leading from the last rock outcrop to our cluster of anchored bodies. The next minute, the mountain rubbed its hand across the page and left nothing but blank white. The wind came sideways, not down from the summit like usual, but curling up from the western CWM in hard, slicing gusts that made the fixed line hum like a taut guitar string. We were high enough that every motion demanded a reason. Camp 4 was behind us in theory, a scatter of tents and oxygen bottles somewhere downslope, but in practice it might as well have been on another planet. Above 26,000 feet, distance becomes a cruel joke. Your watch says a ridge is 20 minutes away. Your lungs say it's a lifetime. I pressed my gloved hand to the rope and felt the vibration through the nylon. It steadied me in a way my own heartbeat couldn't. I was the client on this climb, but I wasn't a tourist. I'd spent years preparing, obsessing over training plans, altitude simulations, and gear lists until my home looked like an equipment depot. Still, none of that mattered when the mountain decided to simplify your life to 3 questions. Can you breathe? Can you see? Can you keep moving? Tenzin Dorje had been the one constant since base camp. His voice had a low, practical rhythm, a man who didn't waste words because oxygen was too expensive to spend on conversation. He'd guided in storms before. He'd turned teams around when summit fever infected them. He'd pulled climbers off ladders in the Khumbu icefall like a father snatching a child from traffic. Now, as the whiteout thickened, he moved down the line, checking each anchor point with methodical speed. He touched carabiners, tugged knots, looked each of us in the face one by one as if counting. When he reached me, his eyes narrowed behind ice-crusted goggles. "Stay clipped," he said. "No one moves." His glove tapped my chest, 2 firm hits, and then he moved on. To my left, Anton Petrov, a broad-shouldered Russian with a permanent squint from a lifetime of snow glare, shifted his weight. His mask hissed with each breath. He raised his voice into the wind, trying to sound casual. "How long this lasts?" he called. Tenzin didn't answer. He looked up into the white and listened, as though the storm was speaking a language only he could hear. Behind Anton, a smaller figure trembled. Mara Klein, a German paramedic who joined the expedition after surviving an avalanche in the Alps. She was the one who had patched our blistered heels at Camp 2, who had stayed up late sterilizing a needle to drain a climber's frostbitten toe. She was not easily rattled, but this storm had changed the texture of fear. It wasn't dramatic. It was intimate. It pressed its face against your visor and breathed on you. Then Tenzin made the move that would haunt me for the rest of the climb. He unclipped from the fixed line. At first, I assumed he was repositioning to check an anchor buried under drift. It was the kind of detail only a seasoned guide would notice. But he didn't crouch or dig. He stood upright, took one measured step away from the line, then another. "Tenzin!" I shouted, though my voice came out as a muffled bark against my mask. He didn't look back. He raised a hand as if to silence me, then walked into the white. The storm swallowed him so quickly it didn't feel like watching a man walk away. It felt like watching a man be erased. For a few seconds nobody moved. We were a string of climbers pinned to the mountain by rope and fear, trying to decide whether what we'd just seen had actually happened. Above us, the fixed line disappeared into fog. Below us, it vanished the same way. Our world had shrunk to a narrow corridor of nylon and ice. Anton craned his neck. "He went offline," he said, the words falling heavy, as if naming it made it real. Mara leaned closer to me so I could hear her through the wind. "Why would he do that?" she asked. I didn't answer because I didn't have one. The only thing I had was a sudden awareness of time. At altitude, time isn't measured in minutes. It's measured in warmth, in oxygen pressure, in whether your fingers still obey you. But my mind, desperate for something stable, latched onto numbers. I clicked my radio and spoke to the team channel. "Tenzin off the line. I'm counting," I said, forcing calm into my voice. The radio crackled with static. Nobody replied. I started counting out loud into my mask, quietly at first, then louder, as if volume could push back the storm. 1 minute! A gust slammed into us. The rope snapped tight. Snow poured into the seam of my hood and melted against my neck, instantly freezing in a damp collar. 2 minutes. Anton shifted, trying to peer into the void where Tenzin had vanished. "Maybe he saw a safer ledge," he muttered. "Maybe anchor broken." 3 minutes. Mara's eyes flicked between Anton and the whiteout. She was breathing too fast, short, quick pulls that wasted oxygen. 4 minutes. I tasted metal. It wasn't blood. It was that thin chemical tang your brain invents when it doesn't like what's happening. At 5 minutes, Mara grabbed my sleeve. Her glove was shaking. "We should call him," she said. "Radio him directly." I keyed my mic. "Tenzin, this is Evan. Report status." Static answered. Anton tried next, barking into his mic in Russian and English. Nothing. At 7 minutes, the storm deepened. The wind shifted, and for a heartbeat the white thinned, revealing a slanted wall of ice 10 meters away. Beyond it, nothing, just spinning snow. It felt like standing inside a living animal. At 9 minutes, Anton's voice dropped to something raw. "He's not coming back," he said. Not as an accusation, more like a confession. Mara's face tightened. "Don't say that." At 10 minutes, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. We didn't have a plan without Tenzin, not a real one. We had Sherpa support lower down, yes, but up here, the decisions were his. The route, the timing, when to push, when to turn. We'd trusted him so completely, we'd let him become the mountain's interpreter. At 11 minutes, I heard something. Not a voice, not a radio. A sound in the snow, soft, rhythmic like crampons biting ice. I stopped counting. Anton went rigid. Mara's head snapped toward the noise. Out of the white, a shape formed. It grew from a smear into a person, walking with deliberate precision. A headlamp glowed faintly through frost. The figure moved straight toward our line, as if guided by memory. "Tenzin," Mara whispered, and relief flooded her so hard she nearly cried. But my stomach didn't loosen, it tightened, because the gait was wrong. Tenzin's usual movement had been economical, yes, but also fluid, like a man who'd spent his life on steep terrain. This walk was stiff, measured in equal beats, as if someone had taught him how to move by watching videos. He reached the line and clipped in without hesitation. Then he stood there, facing us. Up close, the details snapped into focus. His jacket was the same red down suit with black reinforcements. Harness in place. Same oxygen setup. But his goggles were pushed up, and the skin around his eyes looked altered. Not injured, not frostbitten. Blank. Like he'd been awake for days without sleep. Mara leaned forward. "Are you okay?" she asked. Tenzin's lips moved beneath his mask, but no sound came. He reached up and adjusted the mask strap with a slow, careful motion, one tug, then another, like he was making sure it was real. Anton exhaled sharply. "Where you go?" he demanded. "You leave line. Why?" Tenzin turned his head to Anton, then back to me. His eyes settled on mine with unsettling focus. For a second, I felt as if I were being studied, not recognized. Then his radio crackled. Not because he keyed it, because it turned on. A faint hiss and a burst of static. I heard a voice, too faint to make out words, and then it cut. Tenzin's eyes widened slightly as if that sound had surprised him. He touched the radio at his shoulder, pressing it like you might press a bruise to see if it hurts. Mara lifted her hand, palm up. "Tenzin, talk to us." He nodded once, but it wasn't the nod of reassurance. It was the nod of someone pretending. I forced myself to breathe slowly. "Tenzin," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Why did you unclip?" He stared at me for 2 seconds too long. Then he lifted his gloved hand and pointed upslope. Into the white. "Move," he said. The word came out rough, as if his throat hadn't used language in a while. Anton blinked. "Move where? We wait. You said wait." Tenzin didn't respond to the contradiction. He pulled the fixed line upward, testing it, then started climbing as if the decision had already been made somewhere else. His movements remained too even, too controlled. He didn't look back to see if we followed. Mara's eyes darted to me. He's disoriented," she whispered. Anton shook his head. "No, he's wrong. My mind sprinted through possibilities. Hypoxia could do terrifying things. Confusion, poor judgment, hallucinations. High-altitude cerebral edema could steal a person's logic and leave them stubborn, impulsive. Cold could blunt emotion. But I'd seen hypoxia before. I'd watched a climber at Camp 3 insist his tent was on fire when it wasn't. I'd listened to a man laugh while crying because his brain couldn't choose an emotion. This was different. This felt intentional. "Tenzin," I called again, louder. "Stop! Tell us what you saw." He paused, not because he'd chosen to, but as if the command had snagged him. He turned slightly, looking down at us through the curtain of snow. "I saw a break," he said. "A path." "A path?" Mara repeated. Tenzin nodded. "We go now." Anton's voice rose in anger. "There is no path. Only line." Tenzin's eyes flicked to Anton with irritation that didn't fit him. Tenzin Dorje didn't get irritated. He got firm. He got quiet. But irritation was personal, emotional. "Do you want to die here?" Tenzin asked. The words hit the air like a slap. Mara recoiled. "Tenzin, stop! We're anchored. We can—" "No!" he snapped, cutting her off. "You stay, you freeze. Wind will take tent lower. We move." I swallowed, fighting the impulse to obey out of habit. This man had kept us alive through the icefall, through wind at Camp 3, through a night where our stoves barely worked. The muscle memory of trust was hard to override. But something was wrong. I looked at his gloves. The left glove had a tear near the thumb, small but visible. I remembered that tear from 2 days ago when he'd caught it on a rock. It was the same glove. So it was him. Or at least the same gear. The same body. My thoughts spiraled into a place I didn't like. What if he'd fallen? What if he'd hit his head? What if he'd gone into a crevasse and someone had pulled him out? That was nonsense. I clung to science the way I clung to the rope. Hypoxia, cold shock, near-death panic, those were real. Still, 12 minutes. 12 minutes in a whiteout off the line on Everest was not a small thing. It was a separate world. Mara spoke softly, choosing her words like she was approaching a wounded animal. "Tenzin, can you tell us what direction you went? Left of the line? Toward the ridge?" He stared at her. His eyes moved, searching for meaning. Then he said something that made the hair rise on my neck. "Not left," he murmured. "Not right." He pointed again, but this time not up or down. His finger angled into the storm at a diagonal, toward nothing visible, toward empty air where the slope should have dropped away. "There," he said. Anton leaned in, squinting. "There is nothing." Tenzin's breathing quickened. He grabbed the rope and pulled hard, as if trying to drag us toward his idea. "There is," he insisted. "I heard it." Mara's voice went thin. "Heard what?" Tenzin opened his mouth and hesitated. His eyes flickered, and for the first time, a crack appeared in the blankness. Not fear, not confusion, recognition, as if he'd realized he'd said too much. "Move," he repeated. "Now." And then, without waiting, he began ascending again, faster this time, like urgency had replaced caution. I stared after him, torn. If he was right, and the storm was about to worsen, staying anchored might be a death sentence. If he was wrong, moving in a whiteout could pull us off the route, off the fixed line, into terrain where a single step could be the last. Anton's voice dropped. "We don't follow," he said. "We wait for storm break." He come back to himself. Mara looked between us, panic sharpening her features. "But he's leading. If he goes and we don't—" "He's not leading," Anton snapped. "He's something else." I hated the way that sounded. It felt superstitious, weak, but my gut didn't argue. I keyed my mic again. "Team, this is Evan. Tenzin is moving upslope. He's not himself. Do we have contact with lower Sherpa?" Static. Then a faint voice from below. Karma, one of the Sherpa climbers stationed lower. "Signal bad. Repeat." I swallowed. "Tenzin, he left the line for 12 minutes. He returned, altered. He's pushing us to move into whiteout." A pause. Then Karma's voice. "Do not follow offline. Stay clipped. Storm pass." I felt a rush of relief so intense it almost made me dizzy. An external anchor, someone else saying what my instincts had whispered. But above us, the rope jerked. Tenzin was climbing with force, pulling the line taut, urging motion. In the whiteout, his headlamp bobbed, a ghost light vanishing and reappearing. He stopped again and looked down. Even through the storm, I could feel his gaze like pressure. "You come," he said, voice carrying in the wind, "or you stay and become stone." Anton muttered a curse. Mara's lips trembled. "Tenzin, please, just come back down. We'll wait together." For a moment he didn't move. The wind eased half a notch, and the white thinned enough that I saw the outline of his face. He smiled. It was small, almost gentle. But it was not Tenzin Dorje's smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something we didn't, and enjoyed the fact that we were about to learn it the hard way. Then he turned and climbed, disappearing into the storm again, leaving us anchored in a world of white, listening to the rope vibrate with his departure. And somewhere in the roar of the wind, faint and impossible, I heard what he might have meant. A sound like a radio transmission, warped, distant, forming a pattern that wasn't language, but felt like it was trying to become one. I stared into the blankness where our guide had vanished twice now, and a thought landed in my mind with terrifying clarity. If we stayed, we might freeze. If we followed, we might find out what had called him into the storm, and either way, Everest had already begun to choose for us. The rope between us and Tenzin was the only proof he was still real. It trembled in pulses as he climbed, too fast for the conditions, too confident for the way the mountain had disappeared. Each time the wind shifted, the line flicked and snapped against the ice, like it was trying to warn us. I kept my left hand locked around it, knuckles burning inside the glove, and forced myself to look at Anton and Mara instead of the headlamp glow fading above. Anton's jaw was clenched so tight, the strap of his mask dug into his cheeks. "We stay," he said again, as if repeating it could anchor reality. Karma said, "Stay." Mara's eyes were wet from the wind. She pressed her forehead against her gloved hand for a moment, breathing, trying to slow herself. "If he keeps going," she said, "he'll hit the Hillary Step area in this. Or worse, he'll wander." I keyed the radio. "Karma, repeat. Do not follow offline. What about following online? He's still clipped to the fixed rope." Static, then Karma's voice came through, broken and distant, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "If Tenzin pull you offline, no. If he stay on fixed line, maybe move down, not up, storm dangerous. Better to descend." Descend. The word settled in my chest with weight. Descending wasn't failure, it was survival. But it also meant turning our backs on the only person who knew this route like a heartbeat. And it meant something worse. It meant letting Tenzin Dorje, our guide, our compass, our lifeline, walk into the storm alone. Another tug came through the rope. Tenzin had stopped again, farther above. His headlamp glow hovered, then bobbed once as if he'd looked back. I shouted, "Tenzin, you need to come down, now!" For a few seconds, there was nothing but wind. Then his voice carried down, muffled but distinct. "I am fine," he called. "This way is safe." Anton barked a short laugh that had no humor in it. "Safe," he repeated, shaking his head. "In Whiteout, above 26, sure." Mara leaned close to me. "Evan," she said quietly, "he's hypoxic. If we leave him, he dies." Team, I hated how reasonable that sounded, and how dangerous. Above us, that headlamp glow shifted sideways, not up. Tenzin's silhouette angled away from the fixed line, just enough that my stomach tightened again. "He's going off," Anton said. I watched the rope and saw it, the line pulling at an unnatural angle, tension traveling through it like a message. Not the gentle tug of someone repositioning, the purposeful drag of someone trying to change where the rope led. "Tenzin!" I yelled, forcing authority into my voice. "Stay on the line!" For a second he paused, then the rope jerked hard. Mara grabbed the line with both hands. "He's pulling us," she said, voice breaking. Anton planted his ice axe and clipped his safety tether tighter. He wants us to go with him, he said. He wants witnesses. The wind eased just enough for the whiteout to thin for a heartbeat. I saw a hint of the ridgeline above, a black smear against the grey. And I saw Tenzin, standing with his body angled away from the route, one arm extended, pointing into nothing. His glove was raised like a conductor's hand. Then the white slammed shut again. I made the decision the way you make decisions in thin air, quickly, because thinking too long is its own kind of death. We're not going off, I said, but we're not leaving him either. Anton glared. Explain. We move down, I said. We descend on the fixed line toward Camper 4. We keep him in sight as much as we can. We call Karma. We call the other Sherpa. We get support to bring him back safely. Mara's shoulders sagged with relief, then tightened again. But what if he keeps pulling? Then we lock the line, Anton said grimly, and he learns rope does not obey madness. I didn't like his phrasing, but the idea had merit. If Tenzin was trying to drag us into a direction that wasn't the route, we could anchor ourselves and prevent it. We began the descent with slow, deliberate moves, unclipping and reclipping our Jumar devices, keeping our tethers short, each step a small negotiation between balance and oxygen. My thighs screamed with effort, even as gravity helped. The mountain was a steep, frozen lung that refused to exhale. Above, Tenzin moved too, not down. Sideways again, the fixed rope vibrated in a strange pattern. Pull, pause, pull, pause, as if he was testing our response. At a certain point, we reached a flatter ledge, where the snow had drifted into a shallow bowl. We could rest there for seconds without losing footing. I used the moment to key the radio again. Karma, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We're descending. Tenzin is pulling the line sideways. Do you have visual from below? Static. Then, no visual. Wind strong. Stay en route. Do not go toward unknown. Unknown. That word stung, because it described more than terrain. As we moved, something else began to happen. Something subtle at first, easy to blame on fatigue. My radio hissed in a different way, not the constant static of wind interference, but a rhythmic pulse. It rose and fell like breathing. Mara noticed too. She tapped the radio at my shoulder. Your signal. Listen. I listened. Beneath the hiss, there was a faint pattern, like someone pushing a button in intervals. Not Morse code exactly, but structured, intentional. Anton's radio crackled at the same time. He froze mid-step. You hear? He said. We all stopped, clipped, anchored, and listened as the wind howled around us. A fragment of sound surfaced, a syllable that might have been a word. Then it vanished. My mouth went dry. It's coming from somewhere, I said. Mara's eyes tracked upward into the storm. Or someone. Anton's voice went low. It comes when he moves. As if on cue, the rope snapped tighter again. Tenzin was moving, dragging, pulling, drawing the line at an angle. He wasn't descending with us. He was keeping pace, but offset, like a hunter shadowing prey from the trees. Then, through the white, I saw his headlamp flare brighter for a second. He'd turned his light toward us. And I heard him, clearer than before, close enough that his voice cut through the wind like a blade. Stop going down, he called. You are going away from it. From it. The words chilled me more than the storm. Mara lifted her head, voice trembling with anger and fear. From what, Tenzin? For a moment, there was silence. Then he answered, and the calmness in his voice made it worse. From the place that keeps you alive. Anton spat a curse into his mask. The place that keeps you alive is the rope in the camp below. Tenzin laughed, not loudly, not crazily, just a soft sound that didn't belong in the death zone. You think camp keeps you alive, he said almost kindly. Camp keeps you waiting. The rope jerked again, harder. The tension pulled at my harness, yanking me sideways. I threw my weight into my axe and felt the bite of steel into ice. Mara did the same. Anton braced like a man trying to stop a train. "Tenzin!" I shouted. "Stop pulling! You're going to rip the anchors!" He didn't answer. The pulling continued, steady and forceful. Then, suddenly, it stopped. Not because he let go, because the rope went slack. A slack fixed line on Everest is a bad sign. It means something has changed, an anchor has failed, or someone has unclipped, or the route has shifted under the snow. My heart hammered. "He unclipped again," Mara whispered. Anton's eyes widened. "No." We stared upward into the white, trying to see a headlamp glow. Nothing, just snow and wind. Mara's breathing went fast again. "He's gone," she said. "He's off the line." And that was the moment the radio made itself impossible to ignore. The hiss turned into a clear burst, sharp enough that we all flinched. Then a voice came through, thin, distorted, but undeniably a human voice. It spoke one phrase. Not a word I recognized at first because the accent was wrong, the cadence wrong, the syllables dragged as if the voice had been stretched. Then my brain assembled it into meaning. "Evan, come closer." My blood went cold. Anton stared at me. "It said your name." Mara's eyes were wide with a fear that was almost reverent. "How could it know?" I forced myself to check the simplest explanations first, because the mind above 26,000 feet will gladly invent monsters to avoid admitting panic. "Radio interference," I said. "Someone on another frequency, a recording, anything." But even as I said it, another burst came through, longer this time, like someone holding the mic open. A faint breathing sound followed, wet and slow, like lungs in a mask. Then silence. We stood there clipped to the mountain, a trio of specks in a storm, listening to the empty air after a voice had spoken my name like a promise. Mara reached for my arm. "We have to descend," she said. "Now. We get to camp. We get Sherpa. A shape appeared through the white. It wasn't above. It was beside us. So close, it felt impossible we hadn't seen it sooner. Tenzin stepped out of the storm at our level, as if the mountain had opened a door and let him through. His headlamp was off. His goggles were up. Snow clung to his lashes like frost flowers. He looked dry, not soaked from snow, not glazed with rime, dry like he'd been somewhere sheltered. Anton recoiled. "Where were you?" he demanded. Tenzin didn't answer Anton. He looked only at me, and in his eyes there was that unsettling clarity again, like he was awake in a way we weren't. "The radio spoke to you," he said. My throat tightened. "Yes." He nodded, satisfied. "It knows you." Mara's voice shook with fury. "Tenzin, stop this! We're going down." Tenzin turned his head to her slowly, as if remembering she existed. "Down is not safe," he said. "Down is where the wind finds you." Anton jabbed his ice axe into the snow and leaned forward, ready to fight if he had to. "You leave line twice," he growled. "You pull rope like crazy. You come back dry. You tell us voices know us. What happened to you in those 12 minutes? Tenzin's mouth twitched. 12 minutes, he repeated, tasting the number. "You counted?" "Yes," I said. "Because you vanished." He looked almost amused. "I did not vanish," he said. "I stepped through." Mara's breath caught. "Through what?" Tenzin lifted his arm and pointed again, not up, not down, but diagonally into the storm, toward the same impossible angle as before. "There is a cut in the wind," he said, "a place where the storm cannot enter. You go there and you can breathe." Anton scoffed. "You are sick. Hypoxia." Tenzin's gaze snapped to Anton, irritation flaring. "I was sick," he said sharply. "Then it fixed it." Mara shook her head. "This is dangerous talk." Tenzin stepped closer, and despite the storm, his voice dropped into a calm that felt practiced. "You trust rope," he said. "You trust camp. But rope breaks, camp blows away. This mountain takes what it wants." He leaned in until his goggles were inches from my face, until I could see the tiny cracks of ice in the plastic. "And it wants you tired," he whispered. "It wants you slow. It wants you to wait until you can't move." I felt a flare of anger. "And what do you want, Tenzin?" He paused, as if the question surprised him. Then he smiled again, that same small, wrong smile. "I want you to hear what I heard," he said. The radio hissed at my shoulder like a living thing. Tenzin's gloved hand rose, not to touch me, but to hover near the radio, as if he could feel its heat. "It calls you because you listen," he said. "Most people do not." Mara grabbed my harness strap. "Evan, don't!" The radio burst again, louder than before, cutting through the wind with terrifying precision. "Come," the voice said. "One step off the line." Anton lunged toward Tenzin, grabbing his jacket front with a strength that surprised me at altitude. "No!" Anton shouted. "You are not leading us offline." Tenzin didn't resist. He didn't fight. He simply turned his head slightly, looking past Anton into the white. "Then stay," he said softly. "Stay and freeze." Anton's grip tightened. "We go down," he said. "Now, and you come with us." For the first time, real emotion flashed across Tenzin's face, something like fear, quickly buried. He twisted free with a sudden burst of strength, stepped back and unclipped. Before we could stop him, he moved, fast, into the white at that diagonal angle, vanishing again as if he'd stepped behind a curtain. Mara screamed his name. I started forward on instinct, one step, then stopped, my tether snapping tight against the fixed line. The rope held me back like a hand on my chest. And in that moment, as I strained against my harness, I saw something I hadn't seen before. A faint outline in the storm where Tenzin had gone, like a vertical seam, darker than the surrounding white, as if the snow itself was thinner there. A slit in the blizzard, a cut in the wind. It was only visible for a second. Then the storm shifted and it disappeared. Anton grabbed my arm. "Do not!" he growled. Mara's voice broke. "He's going to die." I stared into the blankness where our guide had vanished for the third time, my radio hissing like it wanted to speak again. Every rational part of me screamed to descend. Every human part of me screamed to drag Tenzin back. But the mountain didn't care about my debate. The fixed line shuddered as if something heavy had brushed it from the side. And from the radio, clear as a hand on my ear, came a new phrase, calm, patient, and impossibly close. "He is inside now," the voice said. "If you want him back, you know where to step." The wind didn't care that the voice had spoken. It kept hammering the slope, shredding any sense of direction until up and down felt like opinions. I stood there clipped to the fixed line, staring into the white where Tenzin had vanished, and the radio at my shoulder hissed as if it were breathing for him. Mara's gloved hand tightened around my harness strap. "We can't go after him," she said, but her voice didn't sound like a decision. It sounded like someone begging the mountain to make the choice for us. Anton's eyes were hard and bright behind his frost-rimmed goggles. "We descend," he said, "now. We survive. Sherpa go later with better visibility." "Udis," I opened my mouth to agree, because it was the sane thing, the only thing that looked like a plan. But the radio crackled again, so softly I almost missed it. Not a voice this time. A faint clicking, like a mic being keyed and released. Mara heard it too. She turned her head as if she could locate the sound in the air. "It's close," she whispered. The fixed line shuddered again, not from our movement, but as if something had brushed it from the side. I felt the vibration travel through the rope into my hand, and my chest tightened. If something had hit the line, icefall, a chunk of wind-driven debris, our anchors could fail. In a storm like this, the mountain didn't need to kill you directly. It could simply loosen one small certainty and let gravity finish the work. "Calmer," I said into the radio, forcing my voice steady. "Tenzin is off the line again. We have possible interference. We are descending." "Are you receiving?" Static swallowed my words. Then Karma's voice arrived in pieces. "Signal. Bad. Keep. Route. Do not. Unknown." Unknown. Again. Anton made a sharp hand gesture. "Move." We began descending with short, careful steps, our crampons biting into ice we couldn't fully see. The slope angled steeply enough that a misstep could turn into a slide, and the fixed line was our only spine. I kept glancing toward the invisible seam Tenzin had pointed to, searching for that darker slit in the white, but the storm refused to reveal anything more than swirling snow. Mara stayed close to me, moving with the tense precision of a medical professional who'd seen what panic does to a body. Anton took the lead in descent, hammering his axe into the slope every few steps like punctuation. Then the rope went slack, just for a heartbeat, but long enough to make my stomach drop. Anton snapped his head up. "Anchor," he said. The line tightened again, but not smoothly. It tightened with a jerk, then a second jerk, like someone tugging from the side. Mara's voice rose. "He's pulling again!" "No," Anton said, eyes narrowing, "not from above." Another tug hit the rope, and this time it came from our right, diagonally toward the empty space where Tenzin had pointed. The fixed line, supposedly an immovable path, was being influenced by something off route. I braced, driving my axe deeper, feeling the steel bite. "Hold!" I shouted. Mara dropped her center of gravity, knees bent, arms locked on the rope. Anton planted himself like a post. The tugging stopped. Silence followed, an unnatural pause in which the storm seemed to lean closer. Then the radio spoke again, clearer than it should have been at this altitude, in this wind. "Not down," the voice said. "Not yet." My mouth went dry. It wasn't just my name anymore. It was instruction. Mara shook her head violently, as if rejecting it physically. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." Anton leaned toward me, voice low and brutal. "Turn radio off." I raised a hand to the power switch, and froze, because the hissing stopped, not faded, not diminished, stopped completely, as if the storm had been muted. In that strange pocket of silence, I heard something else, a faint, steady drip, like melting ice. Up here, in this cold, that made no sense at all. Mara heard it too. Her eyes widened. "Do you hear water?" Anton's gaze flicked toward the diagonal emptiness. "There is a shelter," he said, and I could hear the reluctant logic in him. "A hollow, behind ice. A place where the storm could not enter. A cut in the wind." My heart hammered. Logic and fear collided in my chest until I couldn't tell which one was driving me. If there was shelter, it could save us. If it was a trap, if hypoxia had infected our perceptions, if the seam was just a trick of snow and light, stepping off the fixed line could kill us in seconds. Mara swallowed hard. "If he's in there," she said, "we might get him back." Anton's jaw flexed. "Or we all die." I stared into the white, forcing myself to think like a climber, not like a frightened animal. "We don't go free," I said. "We go on a tether. 10 meters. We build a backup anchor here. If it's nothing, we come back. If it's real, if he's real, we pull him out." Anton stared at me for a long moment, as if weighing whether I was worth saving. Then he nodded once. "One tether," he agreed, "and no hero moves alone." We moved with the frantic efficiency of people who know their fingers might stop working at any moment. Anton drove an ice screw into the slope and clipped a carabiner. I backed him up with my axe and a second screw, creating a crude but solid station. Mara checked knots with trembling hands, her breath loud in her mask. We connected a spare rope as a short tether off the fixed line, something that would keep us from vanishing completely if we stepped into the wrong place. "Evan goes," Anton said, then immediately corrected himself, voice harsh. "No, we go together. I hold, you step. Mara stays anchored and manages rope." Mara's eyes flashed with fear. "I'm not leaving you." "You're the anchor," Anton said. "If you come, nobody brings anyone back." I could see the argument in her face, then the acceptance. She nodded, biting down emotion. I clipped the tether to my harness. Anton clipped as well, standing just behind me, ready to hold or pull. "Slow," he warned. "Probe." I took one step off the fixed line. The feeling was instant, like stepping off a sidewalk into a street with traffic you can't see. The snow under my crampons was softer here, less compact, and my body screamed that this was wrong. I probed with my axe, tapping, listening for the hollow thud of danger. Second step. The wind lessened, not by degrees, but by a sudden, unnatural drop. My ears, used to the roar, rang in the quiet. Third step. The whiteout thinned, not because the storm weakened, but because the air here moved differently. I could see a darker vertical line in the snow, exactly what I'd glimpsed before, like a seam in fabric. It wasn't a hole, not yet. It was the suggestion of one. Anton's voice came tight behind me. "I see it," Mara called from the anchor, her voice thin with strain. "Your tether is halfway. Don't push too far." I edged closer, axe probing. The seam sharpened into a narrow gap between two slabs of wind-carved ice, a fissure, tight, almost hidden, shielded by the angle of the slope. Snow drifted across it like a curtain, but behind that curtain was darkness and warmth. Not warmth like summer, warmth like the absence of wind, like the difference between drowning and breathing. I leaned in, headlamp cutting into the gap, and the beam revealed a smooth tunnel of blue ice descending at a shallow angle, wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Something moved inside. My breath caught, a shadow shifted in the tunnel, and a headlamp flickered once, then went steady. Tenzin's voice came out of the darkness, calm and intimate, as if we were standing in a tent together. "Evan," he said. "Good. You found it." Anton shoved forward, nearly knocking me into the gap. "Tenzin!" he barked. "Come out, now!" Tenzin didn't answer immediately. Instead, a sound came from deeper within the tunnel, like a radio squelch, but not from our radios. From inside. Then Tenzin spoke again. Softer. "He is afraid," he said, and the way he said it, about Anton, not to him, made my skin prickle. Mara's voice shook from the anchor. "Tenzin, please, come back to the line. We're descending." Tenzin's silhouette shifted closer, and his headlamp illuminated his face. He still looked dry. His eyes still looked wrong, too focused, too awake. But there was something else now. A faint smear of dark on his glove, as if he'd touched soot or old grease. "Where have you been?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay level. Tenzin tilted his head slightly, like a man listening to someone through a wall. "Inside the wind," he said, "where the mountain keeps things." Anton grabbed my harness from behind, yanking me back a few inches. "Do not go in," he hissed. Tenzin smiled, that small, wrong smile. "You already are," he said. My throat tightened. "Tenzin, come out," I said. "We'll get you down. We'll get you oxygen. Whatever happened—" "It didn't happen," he interrupted, and there was a flash of irritation again. "It opened." He raised his hand and pointed deeper into the tunnel, behind him. "Look," he said. "You should see. Then you will stop fighting." Anton lunged, trying to reach Tenzin through the gap, but the tunnel narrowed and the ice edges were sharp. "No," Anton growled. "You come out." Tenzin stepped back into the darkness, and for a moment I thought he was fleeing. Then a different light appeared deeper inside, a dim amber glow, steady and unnatural in the blue ice. I stared, pulse thundering. Because the glow wasn't a headlamp, it looked like a small lamp or an indicator, something powered. Something that didn't belong on a natural slope at this altitude. Mara's voice rose to a near sob. "What is that?" Tenzin's voice floated out, calm as a man describing a familiar room. "It's been waiting," he said. "Longer than you." Anton's grip on my harness tightened until it hurt. "We leave," he said. "Now." But the tunnel did something to my senses. The wind outside was a distant roar. Inside, the air seemed still. My breathing felt easier, not because there was more oxygen, but because my body wasn't fighting the wind. The cave offered relief so seductive it felt like a drug, and relief makes people stupid. I took a half step closer to the gap before Anton jerked me back. "Evan!" he snapped. "No!" Tenzin's headlamp flickered again, and his face reappeared at the edge of the tunnel. For a second I saw something on his cheek, a thin line like a scratch, but too straight. Not a wound, a mark. He lifted his radio to his mouth and keyed it. For the first time, I heard his transmission clearly, not distorted. "Come in," he said. But he wasn't talking to Karma. He was talking to whatever was deeper inside the ice. The amber glow pulsed once, as if responding. Then my own radio came alive on my shoulder without me touching it. The voice, closer now, almost gentle, spoke a single sentence that made my stomach drop into my boots. "You brought the others," it said. "Good." Mara cried out, "Evan, get back!" Anton yanked hard, pulling me away from the gap until my tether snapped tight. My crampons scraped ice. My axe nearly slipped from my grip. I fought for balance, heart pounding. Tenzin watched us retreat with that unsettling calm. "You cannot unhear it," he said. And then, without warning, the amber light deep inside the tunnel flared brighter, illuminating something metallic against the ice. For a fraction of a second I saw shapes. A coil of rope that looked old, a cluster of oxygen bottles stacked like supplies, and, most disturbing, a line of frozen climbing suits pressed into the ice wall as if they'd been placed there carefully. Not buried by an avalanche, arranged. Anton's voice turned hoarse. "People," he whispered. "They are stored." Mara's breath caught, a sound of pure horror. "Those are bodies." Tenzin nodded slowly, almost reverently. "The mountain keeps what it takes," he said, "but sometimes it gives back." He stepped forward again, closer to the opening, and now his glove was clearly smeared with that dark residue. He held his hand out toward me, palm open. "Take my hand," he said, "and I will bring you inside where you don't have to fight anymore." The offer landed in my chest like a weight. Not because I wanted to accept it, but because part of me, the exhausted part, the part that had been freezing for hours and had climbed for weeks to reach this brutal place, understood the temptation. Anton shoved me back another inch. "No," he growled. "We leave. Now." Mara's voice broke with desperation. "Tenzin, please, come with us. We can still save you." Tenzin's eyes fixed on Mara for a long moment. Something flickered there, something human, almost sorrowful. Then the flicker vanished. "He doesn't want saving," Tenzin said quietly. "He wants company." And before any of us could react, the snow above the seam trembled. A deep, muffled crack rolled through the ice like thunder trapped underground. The tunnel shuddered, shedding powdery snow in a silent cascade. Anton's head snapped upward. "Ice shift!" he barked. "Back to line!" Mara pulled rope frantically, trying to reel us in. Anton dragged me backward with brute force, crampons skittering, axe biting just enough to keep me upright. Behind us, Tenzin didn't move. He stood in the mouth of the tunnel, watching like a man watching a door close. Then the seam narrowed, not slowly, not naturally. It tightened as if the mountain was swallowing its own secret. I saw Tenzin reach one gloved hand toward the narrowing gap, and for the first time I heard real urgency in his voice. "Evan," he said, sharp now, "don't go down. If you go down, you lose me." The seam shrank to the width of a helmet. Mara screamed his name. I strained against Anton's grip, torn between instinct and reason, and in that frantic second the amber glow inside pulsed again, brighter than ever, like an eye opening. The voice came through the radio one last time, so clear it felt like it was standing behind my ear. "Choose," it said, "the line or the door." And then the ice shifted again with a violent crack, and the seams snapped nearly shut, leaving only a thin slit of darkness, a whisper of warmth, and the last glimpse of Tenzin Dorje's eyes as the mountain tried to seal him inside. The mountain's door didn't close like a normal gap in ice. It closed like a jaw. The seam narrowed with a grinding, muffled groan that I felt through my boots more than I heard through the storm. The blue ice on either side pressed inward, shedding powder into the air. For a split second, Tenzin's headlamp beam flared through the slit, then snapped away as if someone had yanked it. Mara screamed his name again, raw and breaking, and I lunged forward on instinct. Anton's arm locked around my harness and hauled me back so hard the tether jerked my spine. My crampons scraped, skidded, caught. I stabbed my axe down and felt the steel bite, stopping me from sliding. "Tenzin," I shouted into the narrowing crack. "Grab the rope, grab the—" A hand appeared, not fully, just fingers, gloved, pushing into the slit as if trying to wedge it open. I saw the tear on the thumb of his glove. I saw the dark smear on the palm. Real, familiar. Then the fingers twitched once, like a signal. The radio hissed at my shoulder, and the voice that wasn't ours whispered, close and patient. Too late. The fingers withdrew. The seam snapped shut with a dull, final sound that made my stomach drop. Snow immediately drifted across the spot, as if the mountain was eager to hide what it had done. The storm rushed back in full force, the wind roaring like it had been held at bay for those few seconds, and was now reclaiming its territory. Mara sagged against the fixed line, sobbing into her mask. Anton braced, breathing hard, eyes scanning the slope as if expecting the ice to open again. I stood staring at the blank wall where Tenzin had been, my mind refusing to accept the new reality. Our guide was gone, not down the mountain, not lost in fog, gone into something. "Evan," Anton said sharply, forcing me back into motion. "Move, we go down now." Mara shook her head. "We can't leave him," she choked. Anton's voice hardened. "We cannot save a man inside the mountain. We save ourselves." The words were brutal, but the death zone didn't reward softness. I grabbed Mara's harness and pulled her upright. "Mara," I said, as steady as I could manage, "we're going to survive first. Then we bring people back." Her eyes met mine through frost and tears. She nodded, not because she believed it, but because there was no other option that didn't end with our own bodies stored in blue ice. We descended. Step by step, clip by clip, the fixed line became our only religion. I forced myself to stop looking at the sealed seam. I forced my brain to focus on simple tasks. Unclip, slide, reclip, breathe, keep rhythm, don't fall, don't freeze. But the radio wouldn't let it stay simple. It hissed in that wrong, intimate way, like a creature resting its mouth near my ear. Twice I reached to switch it off. Twice my fingers hesitated, as if part of me feared what would happen if I cut the only line to whatever had spoken. At a lower bulge of ice, where the wind finally slackened enough to see 10 meters ahead, we found our first sign that the mountain hadn't finished with us. A boot, half buried in drift, toe pointing uphill. Black plastic with a broken buckle, old enough that the material looked cracked. It wasn't on the route, it was off to the right, toward where the seam had been. Anton stepped toward it, cautious, and cleared snow with his axe. The boot was still attached to a leg. The climbing suit above it was faded red, ancient-looking, the fabric stiff with ice. The body was wedged awkwardly, as if placed there rather than fallen. A harness was still clipped around the waist, and hanging from the harness was a carabiner that had been polished by use, and on the harness, frozen to the nylon webbing, was a small laminated tag. Mara crouched, squinting. "That's a permit tag," she whispered. I leaned in until my headlamp lit the plastic. The writing was faded but readable. A name, a year, 1996. My pulse jumped. "That's impossible," I murmured. Anton's eyes were narrowed. "Not impossible," he said. "Everest keeps bodies for decades, you know." "Yes," I said, throat tight, "but this is off route, and it's positioned like it had been staged." Mara's gloved fingers hovered near the tag, then pulled back as if touching it would be disrespectful. "Why is it here?" she whispered. The radio crackled. The voice, soft, satisfied, answered as if it had been waiting for the question. "To show you," it said. Mara jerked upright, almost slipping. "No!" she breathed. "No, stop!" Anton grabbed my radio and tried to rip it off my shoulder strap. "Give!" he growled. "Now!" I shoved his hand away. "Wait!" I snapped. Not because I wanted the voice, because I needed to understand it, because understanding was the only weapon my mind could find. Anton stared at me like I'd become the dangerous one. "You listen and you follow," he warned. "That is how it wins. It wins." The phrasing hit me like a punch. Mara's voice trembled. What if Tenzin is still alive in there?" Anton's face twitched. "Alive," he repeated. "Or kept." We moved again, leaving the boot and the body behind, descending into thicker snow where the slope became a maze of wind-formed ridges. Visibility improved slightly, enough to see outlines of flags and old anchor points. The storm was still there, but it had shifted into a relentless, grinding snow rather than a blinding white wall. And then, like a mirage, we saw Camp 4. Not tents, not clearly. Just shapes. A ragged line of yellow fabric huddled behind rock, oxygen bottles half buried, a prayer flag whipping like a dying bird, smoke, thin and weak, from a stove someone was fighting to keep alive. Karma appeared first, a dark figure moving toward us with urgency. Behind him, 2 other Sherpa emerged, ropes ready, eyes sharp with the kind of competence that doesn't panic. When Karma reached us, he grabbed my shoulders and looked into my face, searching for Tenzin. He didn't see him. His expression shifted in a way that made my chest hollow. "Where is he?" Karma asked, voice strained. Mara collapsed onto her knees. "He's gone," she sobbed. "He went into the ice." Karma's eyes narrowed, confusion cutting through fatigue. "Into ice?" Anton spoke quickly, bluntly, as if he could slam reality into place with words. He left line. He found hole, a tunnel. It closed. Karma stared at us for a long moment. The wind whipped his hood. He looked at the slope above, then back at us. "You see cave?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "A seam, a cut in the wind. It was real." Karma's jaw tightened. "Old stories," he murmured. Anton snapped. "Not stories. Truth. We saw bodies stored inside." Karma's gaze flicked to the others, and something passed between them. Silent communication, the kind men develop when words are dangerous. He grabbed my radio. "Turn off," he said sharply. I swallowed. It spoke," I said. "It used my name." Karma's eyes hardened. "Turn off," he repeated, now commanding. "You do not listen to mountain voices." I hesitated. One last stupid heartbeat, then flicked the switch. Silence, real silence. The relief hit me so hard my knees weakened. I hadn't realized how much that hiss had been living in my nervous system until it vanished. Karma pulled us into the shelter of a tent line. Inside, the air was barely warmer, thick with the smell of sweat, fuel, and frozen fabric. Several climbers looked up as we entered, faces gaunt, eyes wide. They saw our expressions and knew something had gone wrong. A lead climber from another team, an American named Jared Holt, stepped closer. "Where's your guide?" he asked. Anton answered without embellishment. "He vanished." Jared's eyes narrowed. "Vanished how?" I started to speak, then stopped. Saying it out loud made it sound insane. Mara did it for me, voice trembling. "A fissure in the storm. He went inside." Jared stared. "Inside what?" Karma cut in, voice low but firm. "There is place in ice. People talk. Not safe." The tent fell quiet. A woman in the corner, an older climber with weathered skin and a quiet gaze, spoke softly. "The wind door," she said. All eyes turned. Jared frowned. "What?" She didn't look at him. She looked at Karma. "My grandfather carried loads in the Khumbu," she said. "He used to warn us. When storms come fast, sometimes the mountain opens places where wind can't go, places that feel warm. People follow because they're tired." Karma's mouth tightened, but he didn't deny it. Anton leaned forward. "And some don't come back," the woman finished. "Not because they fall, because they stay." Mara's face crumpled. So he's dead? The woman shook her head slowly. Maybe not, but not yours anymore. The words chilled the tent more than the storm outside. I sat down hard on a sleeping pad, head spinning. Part of me wanted to reject every superstition in that tent. Another part remembered the amber glow inside the ice, the arranged suits, the voice speaking my name with calm familiarity. Jared crouched in front of me, eyes intense. "Listen," he said, voice controlled. "If your guide is missing, we need coordinates, a bearing, something." Anton spoke. "We can't see much, but it was off the line, right side, not far above. It closed." Jared looked at Karma. "Can we go up with ropes and probes? We've got a weather window maybe in—" Karma shook his head. "No window now, storm still strong. If you go, you die." Jared's jaw clenched. "We can't just sit here." Karma's eyes flashed. "We sit because alive. We wait, because mountain chooses." "You want die too?" Silence again. The stove sputtered. Someone adjusted it, and a small lick of flame appeared. The light made faces look hollow, ancient. Mara sat beside me, shoulders shaking. "It called you," she whispered. "Why you?" I stared at my radio, now silent, and felt something like shame. "Because I listened," I said. "Tenzin said that. It calls people who respond." Anton's voice cut in from across the tent, cold and direct. "You must not listen again. Promise." I swallowed. I turned it off. "That is not promise," Anton said, eyes locked on mine. Mara's hand found my sleeve, weak. "Evan," she said, "promise." I wanted to promise. I wanted certainty. But certainty had died somewhere above, sealed behind blue ice. "I promise," I said anyway. Night fell, though night up there was just a darker shade of misery. The storm continued to rake the tents, rattling guy lines, testing stakes. People lay in sleeping bags with oxygen masks on low flow, conserving what they had. No one really slept. They drifted in and out of shallow unconsciousness, jolting awake at every gust. I lay on my back, staring at the tent ceiling inches from my face, listening to the wind and the muffled breathing of strangers. The guilt sat on my chest, heavier than the altitude. Tenzin Dorje had been the reason I was alive, and now he was somewhere inside the mountain. Or not. I must have drifted into a thin, ugly sleep, because when I woke, it wasn't a sound that woke me. It was absence. The wind had dropped. Not completely, but enough that the tent stopped shaking, enough that the silence felt like the mountain holding its breath. I sat up, heart hammering, and heard movement outside, boots crunching, voices low and urgent. Anton was already awake, pulling on his gloves. Mara's eyes were open wide, face pale. "What?" I whispered. Anton didn't answer. He crawled out into the cold. I followed, my body heavy, head thick. Outside, the sky had cleared in patches. The storm had moved like a curtain, revealing stars sharp as needles. The ridge above was a dark blade against the night. Karma stood near the fixed-line anchor point, staring uphill, and next to him, half buried in snow, was something that made my blood turn to ice. A radio. Not mine, not Anton's. A spare radio. Tenzin's, lying in the snow, as if it had been placed there gently. Its antenna was intact. Its battery pack was frosted but not buried deep, as if it hadn't been there long. Karma crouched and picked it up with 2 fingers, like it might bite. Then it crackled to life. The speaker emitted a soft hiss, and a voice, calmer than any human voice had a right to be at this altitude, spoke a single sentence into the night. "He is safe, but the door is closing again." Karma's face went rigid. Anton stared, jaw clenched. Mara's hand flew to her mouth, and I felt deep in my chest a terrible certainty. The mountain wasn't done calling. It had just found a new way to reach us.